All righty. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Today's talk, we're going to talk about zero downtime, ensuring reliable service availability. And today I'll be chatting with our CEO, Carl Herberger. So thanks for joining, Carl. I'm looking forward to this.
Mark, I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks. So just before we get in there, so the point of these webinars, it's been a while since we've done one, so I kind of missed this. So we take a more of a fireside chat approach to this. So Carl and I will have a discussion on a few things. Please feel free to ask questions as we go. I'm happy to answer questions that we get to, and then some at the end. So we'll do that, and then just check in. We'll have some giveaways for you and other ways to follow up with us. So let me just dive into this. So this is always the part when I introduce my guests where I just say I could have done so much more with my life. Okay, so Carl is our CEO. He joined us at the beginning of this year full time, bringing over 25 years of cybersecurity leadership and experience. He's held a number of executive roles at firms, including Radware, Evolve IP, Allied Info Security. He's been a principal security consultant and a virtual CISO. He's been on Fox Business, CNN, and Bloomberg, and now here. So now I'm glad you've.
Pinnacle.
I'm glad
Pinnacle.
That's it. That's it. You're going for it. He's been published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and The Hill. He's received the Technology Executive of the Year Award in 2019 and helped establish the U.S. Air Force's first cyber warfare unit during his time as an intelligence officer. So, you get some pedigree there.
Just happened to, just like Forrest Gump, I just happened into it mostly.
Oh yeah, because one just falls into standing up an intelligence cyber warfare unit. I know, I just fell into that. Okay, so before we riff off into Spinal Tap references like we did, let's just start in. So I want to talk about one of these things around DDoS. And I've often heard the joke, selling DDoS protections like selling insurance, but I think there's a lot there. It's definitely something I've learned as I joined the company. So what I'd like to talk to you about, Carl, is get your perspective on what are some of the most significant financial and operational impacts that businesses face due to DDoS attacks, and how can these risks be quantified and communicated to stakeholders?
Mark, this is one of the biggest elements of the problem that I think we have in really the marketplace in reality today, is quantifying the problem. There's many reasons for it. One is, I think the telemetry of the problem isn't so vivid. It's often opaque to people, and I think the analysis off of the problem isn't really cohesive. Yet the vignettes of the problem are all over the place, right? And we'll go through that. At the moment, and I know I'll sound, and whenever you are in these situations, you always feel like you sound like you might be fear-mongering, but this feels to me like we're in a period like we were before 9/11, whereby there were all these terror attacks all around the world, and they seemed isolated, maybe one-off, maybe sort of like situational or understandable even. But we didn't really see the emerging threat and the point of the threat. And I think that this is kind of what we got going on with availability today. So sum it up, I think the worst case scenario, and I always like to start there on service availability, is what, right? So what is the worst case? And in life, I think most of us like to work on this. What's the worst case? What's the worst that could happen? Well, in this world, the worst case scenario is very bad, right? I mean, it's really bad. So if you were to think about either your business, maybe one's life, maybe it's one's country, one's way of life, and so forth, one's health, one's finances, if you couldn't access the internet, the app, the server, the data, the computational force, the ability to analyze, you may have not much left, right? That's a pretty bad scenario, right? many companies are defined by availability. I mean, it's easy to think of Netflix or Uber or even hosting infrastructure companies like GoDaddy or ServiceNow or ITSM kind of company. It doesn't make a difference what you talk about. Cloud companies, probably most of the world's economy revolves around an app, a server, a function, a requirement to always be up to the internet, right? And without having availability, the situation is akin to a digital nuclear bomb, right? It's really bad. So nobody really wants to talk about it because you sound crazy. You sound like you're in, maybe a FUD purveyor or something like this. Yet, almost on a daily basis, if you're looking at the vignettes of of problems that are being created in an isolated region, not too much different than prior to 9/11 with terrorist strikes. I remember being in the Pentagon when Khobar towers were attacked in Saudi Arabia and thinking, well, that's what happens to an air expeditionary force in sort of a hostile region, not ever thinking that could actually be brought to the shores of the US. So we have things like in just the last 3 weeks, we've had the Port of Seattle, the SeaTac airport, go down from a cyber attack. We've had a UK actual shipping port go down from a DDoS attack. We've had Delta Airlines go down as a result of, and not just Delta Airlines, as a result of the CrowdStrike denial of service situation that came up. We've had Azure go down, Xbox go down. We've had huge DDoS or denial of service in the news, including the CrowdStrike update problem or the Elon Musk Trump interview that was purported to have been disrupted by DDoS attacks. And that's just in the last month. I mean, this is worldwide news, vignettes that talks about service availability. So I think to isolate yourself and to suggest the risk is either low or not meaningful or not mine, or fill in a blank of why you believe you are not the potential, either a target or a collateral of targets, is to not be looking directly at the data points. So that's the reality of the challenge that's before us, is that this problem is ever present, and it, we'll go into this, I'm sure, in the following conversations, but the problem is not only real, it is probable. So where do you fit in that world of the reality of the challenge change?
Well, you bring up a couple points here. So I think, again, you're talking about service availability and you know denial of service, right? So it's not just this is a DDoS attack. It's what impacts what a business or a government organization, what services do they provide to the public, to their customers, and so on, right? So it's not just you're not focusing on the bits and bytes here of, oh, this is how a volumetric attack works. It's what is the impact to the business. And as soon as you start enumerating, well, if I lose this function, it costs the company this much. Or I think even when you talked about the cascading effect of the issue that CrowdStrike had, we actually had somebody on my team in the UK with a sick child who couldn't get medication. I mean, everything turned out fine. It wasn't life threatening, but we just happened to be discussing it. So you see this effect that has very, very real consequences. And there's something, you put up a blog post today, because there were the attacks. I'm going to forget his name, but was it Telegram CEO who was arrested recently?
Pavlov? No,
Pavel
Pavel.
Durov.
Durov.
Pavel Durov. Yep.
Yeah.
And so the fact that there were targets in France had nothing necessarily to do with this, but they were just targets of opportunity or targets of convenience. So it's something from a risk factor I've heard you talk about, that you don't necessarily have to be the intended target to end up becoming a target. You just have to be there.
I'm former military, as you know, and to me, collateral damage is all part of the equation. And of course, it's hard to plan for collateral damage as the organization that got hit with the collateral damage. But if you know that you're if you know that you're a school nestled next to an armory, odds are probably it's not the best place for the school, right? That kind of thing. And if you are a first responder and you're responding to strategic targets in a kinetic war, odds are you know that you're putting yourself at risk, even though you're not really a militant, not by the Geneva rules and so forth. In the digital world, we don't have Geneva rules, and we have a lot of bottlenecks, and we have a lot of single points of failure. And there is, in fact, a lot of collateral that comes along with that, right? And here's actually the fundamental point around all of this. You started this off as DDoS as insurance, and on the one hand, I think that that's true because you're trying to protect yourself against a potential reality in the future that will abate it or somehow mitigate it. On the other hand, if you believe that it is like true insurance, that you will be filing a claim and getting a financial restitution for it, that gives you the wrong mental model, right? Because the availability problem is keeping your business up and running, keeping your function up and running, perhaps keeping your life or your way of life up and running. It's not about financial restitution, right? Financial restitution can do none of that, really, if it's technically not available. So there is a point, though, that I think that it's not natively understood. You, one, must take action to mitigate this threat. In other words, said another way, there is nobody going to come to your rescue, right? Because there is no rescue function. There's no first responder function. There's no policing function. There's no government function. There's no function out there to drive support for you at time of need during an availability cyber attack. If you have a cyber attack based upon availability, there is no one you can call geopolitically, locally statutory, that will help you. You have to do something to contract with a partner or partners or choreograph your own defense. And if you don't take those actions, you plan to fail. That's the old adage, right? You must plan. If you don't plan, you plan to fail. That's the thing, right?
Can we dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing. So, what are companies supposed to do when you talk to folks? And this is irrespective of whether or not they're a customer of ours.
Yeah.
Right? This is just in general. Is there a framework? Like I would say, because actually there is, and I'm not aware of any compliance regulations around DDoS, right? But is there a process framework that you think of, or how would you advise organizations to be thinking, or what can they do to help safeguard themselves?
So there is an emerging concept, not mine, but one from which I found with great interest and great admiration, I think genius, that mostly emerged from, I would say, the engineering team from Netflix, actually, right? But it's called chaos engineering, if you're not familiar with it. So I don't know that it was necessarily alone crafted by Netflix, but Netflix took it to another level. And so the idea was this: if you remember back in the day, Netflix was a company that actually shipped videos, just like Blockbuster and so forth. I mean, they started out with tapes and CDs and so forth. It wasn't the company that we know today. They shifted, and by the way, they shifted everything. They shifted everything to the cloud. They shifted everything to digital streaming services and so forth. And if you remember this period of time, the biggest threat to a streaming service was, are people good? And people knew if you started to have streaming services that were going to be not enjoyed the same way that a video would, or that it would not be a viable business. Said another way, if the quality of your availability, it didn't even have to be unavailable. The quality of your service wasn't good enough, that it would not be a viable business for them. So they set forth something called chaos engineering, and they had something called chaos monkeys. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but so here's how they basically did it. They said, I'm not going to rely on any single point of failure. Item one, right? So in planning, item one, and this is something that people really don't get in our space. It starts with architecture. It ends with architecture. Item one is no single point of failure, right? You must have redundancy in vendor and in process and in technology, right? So they decided that they were going to have multi-cloud strategies, and in many cases, they had very diverse strategies in multi-cloud. And they set forth a motion that said, I'm going to test operationally each one of the clouds situationally and pervasively for its availability and quality of service, and I will drive where the conduit will go based upon the quality of the service. So basically, they every single day unleashed what you would think back in the world of the yellow brick road, the monkeys, right? They released the flying monkeys, and they call them chaos monkeys. And what each one of these monkeys did was they were testing certain processes and procedures on the resting technology, the public cloud infrastructure, seeing if the SLAs were being well done. They were testing security procedures. They were testing sensitivities and so forth, right? But based on that, they had an algorithms on how they were automatically going to drive their service. It worked beautifully. This chaos monkey became known as chaos engineering, with the idea that I'm going to take the worst case scenarios about every single possible plausible way that you can take us down and put it into an automated function or bot. And I call that a chaos monkey, and I'm going to throw it out there. DDoS is part of that. DOS is part of that. The whole chaos engineering concept is part of that. So what are you testing? Single points of failure. What does it mean, single points of failure? I don't know. Do you have one MFA, one multi-factor authentication? Do you have one cloud? Do you have one security vendor? Do you have one technology that you're using? Do you have one API gateway? Do you have one way in which people come into your environment? Do you have backups for any of those things, right? Do you have one technology that rules them all? Do you have one IP address, one BGP announcement, one ASN? Go on and on and on and on and on, right? So single points of failure in architecture. You have one vendor. I only use one vendor for ADCs, one vendor for my bare metal, one vendor for my processors and so forth. Although very great for price controls and for contracts, really, really, really terrible for resiliency and security. And they're always at odds. Essentially, single points of failure, security and resiliency are like two children in a house. They grow up in the same house, but they're nothing at all alike, right? So I flew B-52s back in the day, and B-52s had double or triple resiliency. One flight control system goes out, there is a complete isolated secondary flight control system to be able to cover the flight control systems. Resident on the aircraft, I don't have to worry about a single point of failure, right? It's the same concept. So architecture. Second thing, humans. Humans do stupid things, right? We all know this. And by the way, automation does even stupider things. So the non-human piece can do even stupider things. So between automation and humans, and this is what happened with CrowdStrike, it is another point of failure. So you have to estimate when operations does its thing, how do you go through actually making sure that you're not going to DOS yourself? And that's what I call flight planning, right? So you go through those scenarios on flight planning. So you have to get the human element, the operational element, to be so rigid and so well understood and have options, backup options, bold-faced options. Third thing, this is going to run counter to everything that you know in this space. The rules of the internet, DNS rules, routing rules, handoff rules, backhauling rules, announcing rules, ASN rules, IP handling rules, UDP handling rules have single points of failure in the rules. And you must know those. That's normally where the DDoS and the DOS threats come from, because you can't get around the rules. The rules are what they are, and people take advantage of them. So you must know where you are at vulnerability based upon the rules that you're using. Sovereignty. Sovereignty is another issue that people don't really fundamentally understand, but in certain countries, you can't do some things, so those rules change. I'll give you a great example. Can't do BGP in China. Can't do BGP outside of, you can't route BGP outside of Korea. And there's many things like this, right? So when you're doing these studies and these understandings and these evaluations for planning, you need to understand that. Then the last piece is, how do I screw it all up with a cyber attack, right? And how do I make it all come down? How do I, you built a house of cards around automation, around vendors, around diversity, around the rules, around sovereignty, around compliance, and then now I'm going to try to take the house cards down with attacks. So I call that, all of what I just said, chaos engineering. I would say most security people call the attack piece penetration testing or vulnerability assessments, and that is what that is. But in availability, service availability, you must take much more into consideration than just the vulnerable aspects of cyber attacks. You have to take the notions of single points of failure, a vendor going down, a platform going down, a automation going down, an update going wrong, sovereignty going wrong, a person getting arrested on a platform that takes the platform down, and so forth, as you mentioned. So chaos engineering is the next generation of service availability resilience testing.
Got it. You said something that I'll call triggering, because I used to do disaster recovery exercises when I was in IT. And, I just remember these long nights at Sterling Forest and then SunGuard. But sitting there,
Yeah.
when you're just sitting there and you're like, the last thing you think about are the tapes, right? Because you're waiting to do your part, and then they show up and the tapes are corrupted. So you can't, and everyone's sitting there looking at each other going, oh, we didn't think of that.
Or they're out of order, or they were, exactly. Corrupted is for sure. Yeah. Or they didn't show up, or only some of them showed up. Yeah.
Because you're thinking about what your steps are and what you're going to do when your time comes, then you realize you don't even have the media to get started, and nobody ever thought to check the tapes.
It's funny, being a former military guy, we would think of what's the desired effect on the adversary we want. So for example, let's suppose I don't want them to use their fighter planes against me. Okay, that's the desired effect. Does that mean we need to bomb the fighter planes, or is it more effective to bomb the airport, or is it more effective to bomb the oil and the fuel sources of the airport, or is it more effective to bomb the ammo depots of the airport, and so forth? What's the desired effect that you're really looking for, right?
Yep.
And how long will your action service your desire, right? So that's the other piece of it.
Yep.
And I think we're still in, I would call, infancy, and how we try to think about staying up, getting up, and staying up on. Mark, I have to tell you, I some days think to myself, especially the CrowdStrike, exercise, would we really be that surprised if the internet was down for a very long period of time? And how horrible would that be?
Mm-hmm. I have thoughts, but we have 6 minutes. So in the remaining 5.5 minutes, let's get into it. What can we do?
All right, listen.
Customers and folks out there with these problems.
I think one of the biggest problems that people have, myself included, I think it's just a humane thing, is that we frequently think something that we set in motion will always be effective. I put a roof on, and that roof's going to last forever, or something like that, and that at some point you got to change the roof. You just don't know when, and so forth, right? So things that you do, have done in the past, things that you've decided in the past, they decay. They decay for all sorts of reasons, right? mainly because technology advances and threat advances and the nuances advance and so forth. So I think this world of DDoS protection on top of your essentially service availability, not just DDoS protection, but availability protection, has been characterized in the past by, unfortunately, centralized ways of doing this. Put something in the front of your pipe, put something in the cloud, subscribe to one or the other, maybe both if you have the money. It's been characterized as vendor locked in. Normally you have one vendor, they don't work well with other vendors, they don't like each other, they don't integrate, they're not ubiquitous. It's been hardware dependent. You've had to be enslaved to the hardware or to the service, and the service is enslaved to the hardware. And it's been costly with OpEx, a lot of switches here and coding there and funny ingesting of legitimate traffic and so forth and so on. It's been complex and opaque. It's been really opaque. You haven't really been able to understand what was dirty traffic and what is clean traffic, and does any of my clean traffic still have residual dirty traffic? So what's the future? The future is to put, instead of one big or fewer bigger filters, is to have filters everywhere at all levels. So it's, by its very nature, should be extensible, integrable, and almost by definition, it's software in our world, right? So if you don't have a vendor that's software only, hardware independent, that has powerful ability to have ephemeral commands for filtration, you don't have a next generation solution. You will not be able to grow with what you have. Your roof will leak, and it may leak bad. And when it does, it's hard to change, right? That kind of thing. The next generation solution needs to give you powerful optics. It has to be able to integrate into your existing infrastructure without exception. So whatever you're doing in the cloud, on premise and private cloud, you're doing it in this region, you're doing it in that region, you're doing it small, you're doing it big, whatever. And it must be out of path, right? In other words, it can't cost you time and cycles. It must be able to be done at all levels. And here's one powerful requirement. You can't put a 2-minute solution, which is what most redirections are, 2-minute, 3-minute, 4-minute solutions. You can't put a 2-minute solution to a cloud scrubbing service with a problem that is sub-second. So, the fundamental problem that most people have, and nobody wants to really talk about it, is that they put solutions in place 4, 5, 6 years ago when the problem and the solution were timed appropriately. Today, the problem is sub 1 second, and the solutions you have in place are post 4, 5, 6, 10 minutes. So I would say, you talk about disaster recovery planning and these kinds of planning. Do your chaos engineering, and you'll realize you set the company on up for minutes, maybe hours, maybe permanent outage, depending on how the attack goes and what it's attacking. Because these attacks now are trying to focus around your DDoS defense or your DOS defenses. And if they take those down, then you're rendered basically defenseless, right? That kind of thing. And that's where the next generation attack goes. So said simply, software, out of path, incredible optics or telemetry, triggered with ephemeral programming, leveraging your existing infrastructure, and it has to handle both DOS and DDoS attacks. It just has to.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you. And we got like 16 seconds left. So, so thank you very much. Actually, we're going to do this. If people need to drop, that's fine. I did have a couple questions come in. So if we could hit those quickly on these, and I'm just going to paraphrase. So I apologize to folks if I'm not getting this absolutely exactly how it was written. Okay. So this one is a question really just about to deploy what we have to deploy Corero network security. What would be the impact to an environment, right? Because I know DDoS solutions have in some cases, deserved reputation being very complicated and tough to tear out or even to put into place. That's why I definitely hear that why people don't deploy it. But when it comes to Corero specifically, how much of an impact is that to someone's environment?
Yeah, we get this question a lot, and with our solution, I know this is going to sound like a, kind of a paid shameful plug, but
It's okay. This is our channel. We get to do that.
we actually can implement within hours, within the day, even replacing an existing solution. DDoS is really like filters, and you basically take out one filter off of your faucet and put another filter onto your faucet. Now, you can do that in a couple different ways. We have a way that is inline, where you're filtering the water while the water is going through. We have another way that does it, where you put a detector on top of the faucet, and it will actually zap the problem as it sees it going through the faucet. So it's not actually a problem at the faucet in terms of latency or disruption. So this out of path capability, very, very quick, very, very non-invasive, very, very effective, very, very unique. So, that out of path, which is the next generation way of doing things, our technology has the ability to sit on top of your conduit, your network, and detect and then use commands to ephemerally program your networking devices and NICs, all of them, because of the way things are, to do all of the scrubbing. So we can conjure up your networking devices as DDoS mitigators, resulting in dramatically less cost because you don't have the OpEx associated with moving traffic around, and you don't have the CapEx associated with dedicated DDoS appliances.
Right. And specifically, you're talking about things like our ability to use BGP with edge routers to
BGP,
control
NetFlow,
traffic.
with
And
we have
integration with
some
Juniper.
unique stuff with Juniper, right? Exactly.
Yep,
We can
exactly.
flow ACLs and so forth, and
Yep.
we can dedicate powerful commands of mitigation with powerful routers, and we know how to do that. NetConf is a big way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. The next one, so I'll hit these two quickly. Common issue that I'm reading here, just teams strapped for resources.
Yeah.
So either just through pure time management or workload, or even a skill set. And I know the answer to this question, but what options do Corero offer? In a situation like that, and I'm talking managed services, obviously.
Yeah, this is one of the best things that I love about Corero is that we offer a complete turnkey solution. I believe we're the only DDoS company out there that will premise manage your DDoS devices total turnkey, and not like for some extraordinary cost either. We know that knowing DDoS and knowing how to do the vendor tuning, if you will, requires some sort of pain in terms of yet another vendor to learn. So we often honestly do management and the tools for less price than what most of the other vendors in the marketplace charge for just the tools themselves. So most of our customers actually ask us to manage their devices. As a result, most of the Corero devices worldwide are managed by Corero. So we really understand exactly what's going on with the tool sets. I hope that understand. And we will do that not just for a device, but for a business. So if you have a need to build or want to build a DDoS scrubbing business, we actually manage businesses on behalf of our customers also.
Got it. Thank you. Last question. I know this for a fact. Corero is very much associated with on-prem. But I'm being asked too about what about hybrid cloud environments?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So first of all, hybrid cloud is the everybody acknowledges it's the most powerful scrub. Reasons why is because cloud isn't going to give you just like your water utilities. They're going to have some leakage in terms of the problems, and that your faucet at home is going to be able to capture almost all of the problems associated with your water. Same thing with cloud scrubbers. Cloud scrubbers leak. Why? Fundamentally, because if they get to scrub very, very close to clean, they're going to disrupt legitimate traffic, and we can get into that in great. So the answer is premise is required if you really need a very clean scrub. I would suggest that for money, dollar for dollar, the cloud should be a backup service, not a primary service. And the most expensive services in the world are cloud scrubbers and always on services. And you could do always on with a premise-based device. That's always on, by the way. It just happens to be down pipe, right? And then when and if you have an issue, you can redirect. I find if you actually do the numbers, there are very little issues that result in redirection of traffic or cloud scrubbing. And with so many multi-home solutions in so many environments, the idea of having cloud scrubbing and redirecting traffic through all different ASNs is super complex. And the redirection back of GRE traffic is also, the OpEx is super complex. So our feeling is you have premise. It's required for telemetry, it's required for visibility, it's required for clean pipes and so forth. But you don't necessarily have to have a device. You can have software on top of your network and it directs all of your networking devices. That's next generation. Cloud is a nice backup. We can make a pragmatic case, but that should be your second motion, not your first motion. Why? Because if you're sensitive to dirty water, sensitive to dirty traffic, you're not going to get total clean traffic off of a cloud scrub.
Perfect. Well, thank you. We're a little over, but I appreciate you taking the time.
Mark, it's always great speaking with you. And I love the microphone. I think the fact that you have that microphone,
That's it.
I feel like you're talking to Larry King.
There you go. Well, you know, Mom always said I had a face for radio. So, except we've got the video. Anyways, that doesn't work. Anyways, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who's attended. To learn more, or you want to chat with somebody, just come to Corero.com, hit the speak with a specialist button, and we'll get you in contact with somebody right away. And then, of course, we'll have this available for those who've attended. So again, Carl, thank you for your time. And thank you, everybody. See you at the next one. Bye-bye.
Take care now. Bye-bye.